discussion. I'm now pleased to introduce Bill Keach, who's a member of the Tempest Collective and of the Boston Revolutionary Socialists. In the days after 9/11, he was one of the, many dozens and hundreds of people that were, out there speaking out against the attempt to turn tragedy into war after 9/11. So with that, I'm happy to introduce Bill Keach.
Thank you, Reed, and thanks, Kathy. I just want to begin by saying it's great to be having this conversation today with people like Kathy and Farouk, who have actually been in Afghanistan and Pakistan and know immediately what the circumstances are like in the region. It's the first meeting of this kind that I participated in where there's been that kind of direct input from people who know in an immediate sense what they're talking about. So glad you're both here, and also glad to be on the panel with Erwin. So the US withdrawal from Afghanistan has coincided with the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks. And I've been thinking that the understandable grief about this anniversary, combined with the predictable barrage of patriotic sentiment, both actually, in my opinion, obscure an essential focus on the reality of what happened. 2,996 people were killed on 9/11. 71,000 people have been killed in Afghanistan over the past 20 years. That's an average of 3,550 deaths a day, if you want to think of it numerically. So the most important question about the 9/11 attacks is the one most consistently avoided. Why did these attacks happen in the first place? There's going to be a special on CNN tonight called What Went Wrong in Afghanistan. My expectation is that there will be a lot of acknowledgement of certain kinds of failure, maybe even a few of certain kinds of defeat. But the key question of why organizations like Al-Qaeda or ISIS or the Taliban exist is hardly ever even asked, I believe. What are the historical and social and political conditions that led to the growth of violent, reactionary, fundamentalist Islamic nationalism, and that keep these kinds of political organizations in existence? There's an important reason why this question is suppressed or repressed. It leads inevitably to a recognition of the long-term consequences of US and NATO intervention in the Middle East, Central Asia, North Africa, and other parts of the world. Now, to say this is not to deny the complications and differences among various violent Islamist formations, nor is, or the historical and cultural complexities of Afghanistan in particular, which are very considerable. It is to recognize that these formations wouldn't exist in their present forms if it weren't for US imperialist intervention and war, and for the capitalist priorities that underlie and drive them, even in the face of defeats like the one we're witnessing now. Let's think about the origins of the Taliban itself. The brief account I'll give here is indebted to Deepa Kumar's book, Islamophobia and the Politics of Empire, a book I recommend if you're looking for something to read on this question. It was first published by Haymarket Books in 2012 and is just about to be reissued in a revised and updated version by Verso. Let's go back to the late 70s and 80s. First Jimmy Carter, then Ronald Reagan began to arm and train the Mujahideen, Islamic fighters resisting the Soviet Union's attempt to take over and control Afghanistan. The Mujahideen included militants from Afghanistan itself, but there were also large contingents of Arab militants from the Middle East. Many of the Mujahideen had been educated and trained in Pakistani schools or madrasas, and Farouk may be able to come back and elaborate on this factor if he wants to. A prominent figure among the Mujahideen at this time was a Saudi Arabian businessman named Osama bin Laden. By 1989, the Mujahideen, with US backing, had forced the Soviet Union to retreat. The Taliban, with the support of the Pakistani government and military, were mainly drawn from the Pashtun ethnic group in Afghanistan, fought to win control of the country, and by 1996 had captured Kabul. Ideologically, they are adherents of a reactionary version of Sunni Islam known as Deobandi, or the Deobandi movement, or current. Deobandi is the name of a city in northern India, where apparently this form of Sunni Islam originated. The US publicly criticized the Taliban for their intolerance, especially for their treatment of women. But secretly, the Clinton administration negotiated with the Taliban in the hope of building a pipeline to gain access to and control over oil and gas resources in the Caspian Sea. It was clear, and it still is, that the US government is perfectly willing to look the other way and work with violent reactionary groups like the Taliban when doing so is in the interest of US capital. Under Taliban rule, Afghanistan gradually became a haven for other violent Islamist groups originating in other countries, particularly Al-Qaeda. 15 of the hijackers who carried out the 9/11 attacks were from Saudi Arabia, a major US ally. And there's an article in the news today, I'm sure some of you've seen it, about a just issued FBI report on the involvement of the Saudi Arabian government in the 9/11 attacks. Apparently, this FBI report is inconclusive, but in the course of establishing its inconclusiveness, it presents a lot of new and very disturbing evidence. The US has shown itself quite willing to cooperate with and support groups like the Taliban until the US itself becomes a target of their violence. So why did the US become an immediate target? Why is it still? Two main points about this. First of all, who are the US's main allies in the Middle East? Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in Egypt, Naftali Bennett, Benjamin Netanyahu's recent replacement in Israel, all responsible for violently repressive and corrupt rule in their own countries, and certainly in the case of Israel, especially outside their own national boundaries. All recipients of massive US aid and military support, all enemies of the secular movements for democracy from below that exploded during the Arab Spring of 2010 to 2012. Again, the US government produced a certain amount of doublespeak during the Arab Spring, long on superficial support, short on steps that would enable serious political transformation. Second main point, what was the US's so-called war on terror meant? What has the US's so-called war on terror meant for the lives of most ordinary people in the Middle East and Muslims elsewhere in the world? The Cost of War Project, which is based at Brown University, where I used to teach, estimates that the war on terror has cost 900,000 lives and $6 trillion in government spending over the last 20 years. I just saw, right before I got on this call, a new article in The Intercept that refers to $8 to $9 trillion in government spending. I guess when you get into that territory, it's hard to know what kind of estimate is even comprehensible. Many of these 900,000 lives lost were destroyed by the massive US invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan. But in recent years, some of these 900,000 lives have been destroyed in the new and now preferred US style of over-the-horizon warfare that Kathy mentioned in her comments. That is, remote and technologically advanced targeted attacks, such as drone strikes and special forces operations, like the one that assassinated Osama bin Laden in Pakistan, and that Obama and the Democrats are so proud and confident of promoting. And on this topic, as I'm sure you've all followed it, there's a significant and long special article in yesterday's Washington Post called "Examining a quote unquote righteous strike," that is about the actual evidence of why this car in Kabul was targeted, and the conclusion it comes to is that there's no real evidence that the car contained explosives, and it's the old story about initially about collateral casualties, and now about the occasional accidents that just happened to kill 10 innocent Afghan people. This is what US drone strikes and their touted avoidance of killing innocent people really mean. Groups such as the Taliban and Al-Qaeda and ISIS thrive off the military violence the US deploys in the name, as Biden likes to say, of making sure there are no more attacks on the US homeland. The war on terror is itself a prolonged and ongoing project of inflicting terror on Islamic people around the world. Kathy made this point really well in her remarks. A project driven ultimately by capitalist determination to control the world's oil and gas supplies and profits, and just as important, a determination to maintain and extend US global financial and strategic supremacy. The limits of US supremacy have been made clear in Afghanistan, as they have been in Iraq, as they were in Vietnam. But nothing short of a mass anti-imperialist, anti-war movement can prevent the US and its allies from trying again and again. As Kathy also said, a huge worldwide anti-war current developed in the months leading up to and just after the US's 2003 invasion of Iraq. On February the 15th, 2003, an estimated 17 million protesters filled the streets of New York, Rome, Paris, London, and other cities around the world. But the movement couldn't be sustained. The lingering effects of the 9/11 attacks, together with the Bush administration's lies about Saddam Hussein's alleged weapons of mass destruction, gradually eroded confidence and the participation of many in the movement. The election of Barack Obama also took a toll. Obama had campaigned against continuing the war in Iraq and promised to wind down the war in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, many anti-war protesters believed him. We're now still living with the results. The current catastrophe in Afghanistan presents an opportunity for the socialist left to help re-energize a mass anti-war movement independent of the Democrats. We are the ones who need to be answering the question, what went wrong in Afghanistan, by saying that the war in Afghanistan was a disaster from the beginning, an imperialist war that was never seriously about the needs of a majority of the Afghan people. We have to be the ones insisting that the future of Afghanistan can only be decided by the Afghans themselves, a vast majority of whom don't want to be ruled by the Taliban or by a corrupt puppet government designed to serve US and NATO ruling class interests. I'll leave it there for now and really look forward to the discussion. Thanks.